to keep children and young people safe and learning. During the lockdown, early years settings remain open nationally to all, providing vital early education and childcare. Schools will be open too for those vulnerable children and the children of critical workers. Those at university will predominantly study online, although there are a small number of exceptions, including those studying medicine, healthcare and education. Unwelcome though this latest lockdown is, and I'm very conscious of the real challenges that parents are facing with their children at home, we are far better placed to cope with it than we were last March. We are now better prepared to deliver online learning. This is an important step forward in supporting children to make the progress with their education that they so desperately need, and we'll also do what we can to help their parents. I'd also like to thank all of those parents and carers who are having to step up once more to take on the challenge of home learning. We have set out clear, legally binding requirements for schools to provide high-quality remote education. This is mandatory for all state-funded schools and will be enforced by Ofsted. We expect schools to provide between 3 and 5 hours teaching a day, depending on the child's age. If parents feel their child's school is not providing suitable remote education, they should first raise their concerns with the teacher or head teacher, and failing that, report the matter to Ofsted. Ofsted will inspect schools of any grade where it has serious concerns about the quality of remote education being provided. We have also significantly stepped up the digital support we are providing to schools and parents. The fantastic Oak National Academy continues to provide video lessons for all ages across all subjects, and yesterday the BBC announced it will be delivering the biggest push on education in its history, bringing 14 weeks of educational programmes and lessons to every household in the country. Our delivery of laptops and tablets continues apace. We've purchased more than 1 million laptops and tablets and have already delivered over 560,000 of those to schools and local authorities, with an extra 100,000 being distributed this week alone. By the end of next week, we'll have delivered 750,000 devices. We're also working with all of the United Kingdom's leading mobile network operators to provide free data for key educational sites. We're very grateful to EE3, Tesco Mobile, Smarty, Sky Mobile, Virgin Mobile, O2 and Vodafone for supporting this offer. We've also been delivering 4G routers to families who need to access the internet. Another area where we have learnt lessons is on exams. Last year, all 4 nations of the United Kingdom found their arrangements for awarding grades did not deliver what they needed, with the impact felt painfully by students and their parents. Although exams are the fairest way we have of assessing what a student knows, the impact of this pandemic now means that it is not possible to have these exams this year. I can confirm that GCSEs, A-levels and AS-level exams will not go ahead this summer. This year we're going to put our trust in teachers rather than algorithms.
My son would be really pleased.
The department and Ofqual had already worked up a range of contingency options. While the details will need to be fine-tuned in consultation with Ofqual, the exam boards and teaching representative organisations, I can confirm now that I wish to use a form of teacher-assessed grades with training and support provided to ensure these are awarded fairly and consistently across the country. I know students and staff have worked hard to prepare for the January exams and assessments of vocational and technical qualifications. And we want to allow schools and colleges to continue with these assessments where they judge it is right to do so. No college should feel pressured to offer these, and we will ensure all students are able to progress fairly, just as we will with VTQs in the summer. I know there is understandably concern about free school meals. We are going to provide extra funding to support schools to provide food parcels or meals to eligible children. Where schools cannot offer food parcels or use local solutions, we will ensure a national voucher scheme is in place so that every eligible child can access free school meals while their school remains closed. Finally, I would like to turn to our programme of testing for the virus. There has been a brilliant concerted effort in secondary schools and colleges to deliver testing for the start of this term. And none of this work to roll this out is going to be wasted. Regular testing will take place of staff and students in school and in due course help us to reopen schools as soon as possible. Testing is going to be the centre of our plans to return children back to school, back to the classroom, back to college as soon as possible. Mr. Speaker, I never wanted to be in a position where we had to close schools again. I believe that schools should always have their gates open, welcoming children and always being at the heart of their community. The moment that the virus permits, all our children will be back in school with their teachers and their friends. But until then, we have put in place the measures we need to make sure that they continue to progress. And for this reason, I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Secretary of State Kate Green.
Thank you and a Happy New Year, Mr. Speaker. May I begin by paying tribute to the Deputy General Secretary of the NASUWT, Gareth Young, who tragically died shortly before Christmas. I'm sure the House will join me in sending condolences to his loved ones and to his friends and colleagues in the Union. Mr. Speaker, I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement, but it's disappointing that he didn't make a New Year's resolution to avoid U-turns or chronic incompetence. Once again, where the Secretary of State goes, chaos and confusion follows, and it's children, families and education staff across the country who pay the price for his incompetence. So, Mr. Speaker, I can suggest a New Year's resolution for the Secretary of State, that he at least resolve to start answering my questions. Every pupil who's not in school must be able to access education. We must do everything we can to safeguard learning throughout this lockdown. And I pay tribute to everyone who's made it possible to keep pupils learning online, the incredible teachers, leaders, support staff in schools and colleges, and those like Oak and the BBC who are doing a huge amount to make learning accessible. I welcome the Secretary of State's commitment on digital devices, and I'm glad he's listened to Labour and to the charities across the country who called for zero rating of educational sites. But Ofqual estimate that up to 1.78 million children do not have access to a device. Can he guarantee that under his plans, every child who needs a device will have one as soon as possible, and that every one of those children will be able to learn remotely? And may I repeat the question that the Leader of the Opposition asked the Prime Minister earlier? Will the welcome data deal done with mobile providers take effect immediately? I welcome his comments on free school meals, and I hope he can guarantee that every child eligible for this support is already receiving it. If not, can he assure me that within days they will do so? Mr. Speaker, months ago, the Education Secretary gave a cast-iron commitment that exams would go ahead. At that moment, we should have known they were doomed to be cancelled. I wanted exams to go ahead fairly, but I was always clear that there must be a plan B if that was not possible. For months, there was no sign of any such plan, although the risk that exams couldn't happen has always been predictable. The Secretary of State says he will be providing support to teachers to award grades. Can you tell me when they'll receive the support, what form it will take, and confirm that it will be available in all schools? And can you tell me exactly what will be done to ensure that all grades are fair, consistent, and support pupils to move on in their education or employment? I heard what he said about technical and vocational exams. But frankly, he's failing to show leadership on the exams taking place in January. And he's leaving it simply to schools and colleges to decide what they should do in difficult circumstances. Will he now do the right thing and cancel this week's BTEC exams, as parents, colleges and the Association of Colleges are calling for? Mr. Speaker, staff in every part of our education system have faced a hugely challenging job and done extraordinary things to keep children safe and educated throughout the pandemic. Too often, though, the Secretary of State has refused to listen to their concerns or engage meaningfully with the expertise of professionals on the front line. He can start to make it up to them today. Is the JCVI working on a strategy to vaccinate all education staff, to keep them safe and get children back in the classroom? And does the Secretary of State believe that they should be prioritised for vaccination to keep them safe and allow schools and colleges to reopen? Early years settings remain open to all children, but the Secretary of State has failed to explain how this will be safe for staff and families. So can he tell us what scientific advice he's received that made him think they will be safe? And can he honestly say that he is following the science? And whether providers are open or closed, can he finally reconsider the unjustifiable decision to move early years funding in line with current occupancy, which will push tens of thousands of providers to the brink of collapse? Finally, Mr. Speaker, I turn to the return of schools in the months ahead. The decision to close them is not one taken easily or lightly. And while it is the right thing to do to control the virus and save lives, it has huge consequences for children's learning and development. And that's why Labour have always said that schools should be the last thing to close and the first to reopen. But yesterday, the Prime Minister couldn't guarantee that children would be back in school before the summer. Can the Secretary of State tell us when he expects children to be safely back in the classroom? Mr. Speaker, at every stage of this pandemic, young people have been an afterthought for the government. And now we're back where we were 9 months ago, with schools closed and exams cancelled. There is time to act, but the Secretary of State must act now to ensure all pupils can learn remotely, that families are supported, and the most vulnerable are safeguarded.
State.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd very much like to join with the Honourable Lady in paying tribute to Gareth. I had the great privilege of working with Gareth as his time as Deputy General Secretary of NASUWT, as well as his colleagues there, and very much our thoughts and prayers are with his family and also his friends and colleagues. The Honourable Lady raises a number of very important points. The rollout of digital devices, our commitment to deliver 1 million digital devices across the country. We'll be getting 750,000 of those devices out by the end of next week, supporting schools, delivering on their full allocation of devices that they need, and looking at how we can go further. It's been a great privilege to work with those brilliant teachers, inspiring leaders who and helped fund and support them in setting up the Oak National Academy, a brilliant online school that is actually being viewed not just right across this country but right across the world for the quality of teaching, and we want to see that used more and more as a vital teaching resource. The Honourable Lady is right to raise concerns about free school meals, how important this is for every one of our constituents. And that is why we're putting the funding and support in place, because there's many parts of the country where it will be best for those schools, and they want to deliver those free school meals themselves. In other parts of the country, they won't be able to do that and will want to do it as part of a national voucher scheme. That is why we'll be standing that up over the next few days and making sure that schools are not out of pocket, but most importantly of all, that children and families are supported at this incredibly difficult time. And she asks about whether there will be support for teachers in terms of the training and the guidance and the help across the country as we move to teacher-assessed grades, and I can absolutely confirm that that will very much be the case. We've always been aware that there could be a situation where we would not be in a position to be able to proceed with examinations. But we've always had a clear view that the best way of assessing children is through examination. So I will not apologise for being enthusiastic to ensure that we have been able to be in a position to roll out exams. But we do recognise where we are as a result of this pandemic, we have to take a different course, and that is why we're taking the route that we are. And the Honourable Lady raises about technical and vocational qualifications, and as the Honourable Lady will know, it's very important that we give colleges, schools and providers, all providers, including independent providers, training providers, the flexibility, because there's a lot of young people who will actually need to complete some of their professional competency qualifications in order to take up work and job opportunities, whether that is those who are doing electricians courses or gas courses, where they actually do have to do practical assessment in order for them to be able to get the qualifications to take the work and the jobs and the opportunities that we want to ensure that the door is kept open for them. So that is why we've taken the decision to give providers the discretion, because they will be the ones who best and most accurately understand the needs of their students and those who need those qualifications, possibly to be able to progress into a job that they wouldn't able to do if they didn't have that option. The issue of vaccination. The government has already set out the important need to vaccinate those who are most likely to be hospitalised, most likely to, if they catch this disease, to be the ones who will be not just hospitalised but most at risk of death. But like her, like everyone in the education community, I very much want to see all those who tirelessly every single day through the week and every week keeping schools open for those children of critical workers and vulnerable children, for making sure that when we people are getting vaccinated when schools are fully reopened again. But coupled with this is a really important step forward in terms of the mass testing programme that we've already started rolling out in schools. The mass testing programme in schools will be one of the largest testing programmes that this country has ever seen. It is ready to go, it is ready to be implemented, and it will be an important plank in ensuring that we can get schools opened at the earliest possible opportunity. And it won't surprise the Honourable Lady, but we do listen to the best scientific and public health advice in terms of the decision to keep early years open. We all have a clear understanding of how important early years education is for every child. And as I've always said, I will do everything I can do to keep every educational establishment open if that is possible and if it's the right thing to do. And when we were given the health advice that we could be in a position to keep early years open, it's so important, not just for those children themselves, but also for families. I felt that that was the right decision to do. I do not want to see any school closed for a moment longer than it has to be. That is why in June we all worked so hard and fought so hard to ensure that schools opened right across the country for primary years. That's why during June we did so much to ensure that years 10 and 12 were able to return to school at the earliest possible opportunity. That is why in September we saw the opening of schools right across the country and all children being able to return back to school. And I can absolutely assure the Honourable Lady, I will not let schools be open for a moment longer than they... I will not let schools be closed for a moment longer than they need to be. I will do everything I can to ensure every school is open so that children are able to benefit from the brilliant teaching that goes on in so many of our primary schools, secondary schools and our colleges. Because I know that is the best place for children. That's what I want for my children. I know that's what members want for their children. But most importantly, that is what we want for our nation's children. And that is why I will give everything in order to ensure schools are the first things to be opened in every instance. Because that is what is best for every one of our children.
We now go to the Chairman of the Select Committee, Robert Halfon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I strongly welcome the government's laptop scheme, but we know that there still will be possibly hundreds of thousands of people on the wrong side of the digital divide. Can my right honourable friend confirm that those students who just don't have internet connection or computers at home will be able to go to school alongside children of critical workers? Could he also confirm that any centre assessed grade system will not only maintain standards but provide a level playing field for disadvantaged children, have a fair appeals process, and will he make sure that there are independent assessors, perhaps retired teachers or Ofsted inspectors, to provide a check and balance for each assessed grade awarded? And finally, I welcome what he has said about wanting to open schools again, and I know he believes that strongly. Will he do everything possible to ensure that teachers and support staff are given priority for vaccinations alongside NHS workers so we can get our schools open again sooner rather than later?
Well, the reason that we are rolling out and expanding our devices package because we realise how important that is for all children, especially for those children from the most disadvantaged backgrounds. I can confirm that as in the previous situation where we saw schools had to be closed during the months of March, April and May, children who didn't have access to digital devices were able to access education in that school. And that is the same standard and same guidance that we are issuing today as well. In terms of disadvantaged children and the centre assessed grades and teacher assessment, we'll be doing everything that we can do to ensure that children are not left behind, either down to their background of a community which they have grown up in and where they're learning in. And I'd be very happy and look forward to working with my right honourable friend and his committee to very much take their advice as to any additional actions that we need to undertake to ensure fairness. And we'll certainly take on board his idea and his thinking about bringing in those volunteers and those people who want to support education and making sure that the teacher assessment is fair and robust and maintains standards, but most importantly, fairness for those children who are taking those qualifications.
Now we go to the SNP spokesman, Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We shouldn't, of course, be surprised at this latest U-turn in schools. Any student teacher knows that planning is a key skill, but it's one that the Secretary of State has yet to master. His decisions are being made in a reactionary and last-minute manner. Schools in England have predictably gone from being open with threats of legal action if they closed to being snapped shut in an instant, giving parents absolutely no time to put in place arrangements. And a word to all members. We need to be careful about this narrative of children are falling behind. They're only falling behind on a scale, an external scale that we've defined for them. We cannot use the same metrics this year as we have used before. And of course, much as we all want schools to be open, young people are learning other skills too. That said, it's good to hear that the BBC is producing educational resources. Can he confirm whether there will be resources available for the Scottish curriculum at Nat 5 higher and advanced higher level? Teachers are fed up with politicians paying tribute to them 1 minute and the next minute sending them into unsafe environments. The risk posed to children in school is small. We have evidence for that. But as the Prime Minister said earlier, pupils can act as vectors. So, and let's be clear, if a member of staff in a school catches COVID, there's increased strain on the remaining staff. So it should not only be high-risk staff who are vaccinated. Before we talk about opening schools, we need a clear position on vaccinations for teachers and school staff. The First Minister has committed to looking at this. The Secretary of State has said he will do everything he can to ensure schools open. So will he ensure that teachers are a priority for vaccination so that schools can open with confidence? And finally, on students, there are many students who are now learning at home completely and are not returning to university following Christmas, but they're still having to pay for university accommodation. What support will the Secretary of State look at giving to these young people who are having to pay out in this manner?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's probably interesting listening to the Honourable Lady and her comments about students, and it's probably sort of indicative as to some of the challenges that the Scottish education system has seen with them falling down PISA rankings, because it is really important that we support children to be actually able to learn. It's really important that we do everything we can do to ensure that children are in a position where they're learning about maths and English and the sciences and the arts. And it seems to be indicative of what she was saying, that the SNP doesn't seem to be that interested in actually making sure that children benefit from a knowledge-rich curriculum. I'd be happy to get in contact with the Director General of the British Broadcasting Corporation on the points that she raised, and I will write back to her with those details on that. And of course, it's always a privilege to work with colleagues across all nations of the United Kingdom, and it's really important that we share what works well and what works best. And of course, I would always be happy to work with her. We've extensively funded the Oak National Academy, which has an incredibly rich curriculum resource, and I noticed from the latest figures is used by a lot of students in Scotland as well as in England, and I'd be very happy to share some of the work that we're doing to help support students in Scotland as well as students in England as well.
Peter Aldous.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Secretary of State for his statement. The economic recovery will be skills-based, and the government have quite rightly placed much emphasis on the importance of BTECs. However, there is currently worry, confusion and uncertainty in colleges and schools. Many have cancelled this month's exams, but others have not. They should not have been placed in a position of having to make their own choice as to whether to go ahead with exams. The government should have shown clear leadership so that all students across the country were in the same situation. Will the Secretary of State now work with Ofqual, the exams boards and the Association of Colleges to put in place as quickly as possible new arrangements that will provide students and teachers with certainty, clarity and confidence?
Well, as the Honourable Gentleman will have heard in my statement, that's exactly what I'd said we would do. But also, just for clarity, there are many students and there are many colleges that know for their students' future prospects that they need to complete those assessments during this month if they are going to be able to access work and employment opportunities. So, no, I'm not going to go down the route that the Honourable Member suggests of actually taking that opportunity to potentially be able to access work and those opportunities away from them, because I do not believe that would be right for those children.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Teachers and school staff have put themselves at enormous risk during this pandemic in order to keep schools open. Now that the Prime Minister has accepted that schools are the epicentre of high community COVID transmission, it is essential that the government gives teachers and school staff the priority access to COVID vaccinations that they deserve. So will the Secretary of State look at adding them to Category 7, as this would make teachers and school staff a top priority for vaccinations after all those who are 65 years of age and over, all those who are clinically vulnerable, and our NHS and social care staff?
Well, as every stage, we have put the safety of students, of pupils, of teachers, of the whole workforce, and including the whole community, at the heart of everything we've done. And all the evidence has gone to show that the work, the precautions, the measures that have been put in place has meant that schools have been able to operate safely and well. But we will constantly work with the whole sector to ensure every measure is undertaken to ensure that that continues. That is why we're ready to roll out a mass testing programme, delivering millions of tests right across the board. This will be happening in schools as they welcome the children of critical workers as well as vulnerable children into them. But when schools fully return, when they're able to welcome all children back, the testing regime is going to be at the centre of that return.
Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I understand why there is the cancellation of GCSEs and A-levels. And I'm pleased to hear him talking about in the substitute system, it will be robust and fair. But what can you do to confirm for the young people of Hinckley and Bosworth that students will be rewarded for how they perform, that they're not disadvantaged by the school they've gone to, and also the teachers who are performing these assessments have buy-in and ownership of what they are doing in the current situation?
My honourable friend raises a really important point, and the great advantage that we do have is we have the opportunity and the time to roll out extensive training, guidance and support for those teachers in terms of making that assessment to ensure that it is accurate and fair and reflective of the abilities of that child. That is what we're going to be doing. That is what we're going to be undertaking with schools over the coming months, and we endeavour to ensure that teachers and all those working in the education system are supported in his constituency as they are right across the country.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It was irresponsible of the government to announce the cancellation of GCSE and A-level exams and to say nothing about BTEC exams without any details of an alternative plan being agreed. Students and their families in Luton South have already suffered greatly over the last 9 months and are deeply anxious about this continued uncertainty that's been created. Many students have contacted me to say they are suffering negative impacts on their mental health as a result. So I would ask the Secretary of State what plans he has to provide additional mental health support for our children and young people.
Well, of course, one of the great advantages that we've had with schools being back all the way through the latter half of last year is actually teachers and those working in schools have been in the best possible place to assess and work with children and have the best understanding of some of their needs and some of the problems that they have, including mental health challenges, and we'll be working with the education sector to best support them. in terms of actually supporting. We've already taken a number of actions supporting schools and education settings with children who have been suffering mental health problems as a result of COVID and as a result of being out of school, and we'll continue to do that and step up those measures over the coming months.
Marco Longhi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Secretary of State not just for the statement he has made, but also for the huge effort he must be putting in trying to balance conflicting priorities. So as a father to an A-level student who was hoping to take her exams this year, I can relate to the anxiety so many young people and their parents must feel in Dudley North and across the country due to the uncertainty of the situation. Can my right honourable friend assure me that he will make every effort to remove this uncertainty by bringing clarity at the earliest opportunity so students can better focus on their studies and teaching staff on the best approach to support them?
As my own daughter, who is was due to be taking her own GCSE exams later on this year, I can absolutely assure my honourable friend that I very much hope the statement today has given a clear sense of certainty and direction of where we're going. We will also be following this up with further detailed consultation by Ofqual that will be launched next week. It will be a 2-week consultation period that Ofqual will be leading, and it's very important that we do get feedback from the sector in order to be able to ensure that the details of this policy are properly understood and work best, not just for schools and colleges, but most importantly for those who are receiving the grades.
Mike Amesbury.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Given that the company Computer Centre awarded the £96 million contract with no deliver all the laptop kits to vulnerable children in the first lockdown, why is the Secretary of State sticking with Tory party donors from this company this time?
Well, I'd like to take the opportunity to pay tribute to Computer Centre, who've done an amazing job of distributing hundreds of thousands of devices right across the country. The Honourable Gentleman is right to say that we did a direct award on the first contract, as Computer Centre were one of the few businesses that were in a position to be able to assist us at that time, but since then tenders have gone out and Computer Centre have won those tenders through fair competition.
Kevin Hollenrig.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Some North Yorkshire schools are operating a full formal timetable with checks and balances, including roll calls and marking, but some schools are not. Does my right honourable friend agree that all schools should use this kind of best practice to make sure students work as hard and as effectively remotely as they do when they physically attend school?
Well, as a former North Yorkshire County Councillor and having been on the Education Committee of North Yorkshire County Council, I absolutely do agree with my honourable friend. It's absolutely vital that we keep as much formal education in place as possible. Schools have moved forward in absolute leaps and bounds in the offer that they are able to put there. But we do recognise there has been variability, and that is why we've taken the actions that we have, including the actions that we will take with Ofsted to ensure that there is good, high-quality remote education delivered in all of our schools right across the country.
Paula Barker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to place on record my thanks to the National Education Union and Unison for the work they've been doing to keep school staff and pupils safe. In my constituency of Liverpool Wavertree, I've been inundated with enquiries from worried parents and nursery staff about nurseries remaining open and the risk that poses, particularly when elderly grandparents are often used to pick up children as part of support bubbles. And I'm afraid the narrative from the Secretary of State that this group are least at risk is not enough and doesn't instill confidence. So will the Secretary of State fully explain to my constituents why nurseries and early years settings are not closing, with the exception of providing services to key worker children?
Well, early evidence from SAGE has showed that early years provision had a smaller relative impact on transmission rates than primary schools, which in turn had a smaller relative impact than secondary schools. So that is why the decision was taken. And the Honourable lady mentions the National Education Union, and I'd like to thank both National Education Union and Unison for recognising the fact that the action that they took and the advice that they gave their members on Sunday was incorrect, and that they have withdrawn that advice. It was the wrong advice, and I'm glad that they have reflected upon it and recognised it was the wrong advice.
Tim Lawson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Ministers will know how bitterly disappointed I was when schools were so abruptly closed because of the impact on mental health, the attainment gap and safeguarding. So to give certainty and to enable schools to plan ahead, will the Secretary of State make the February half-term the default target date for return, barring any new crisis? And for those schools remaining open for key workers and vulnerable children, can we make sure that this time they are not turning away children on EHC plans, in particular on the basis that schools couldn't safely look after them, as I'm already hearing complaints from parents that their children who are entitled to attend are being placed on waiting lists?
My honourable friend is absolutely right to point out that children on an EHC plan are entitled and should be allowed into school and receive that care and support that school provides those incredibly important children. So absolutely, categorically make that totally clear to all schools and to all colleges as well. I would like to see schools open tomorrow, as my right honourable friend would know. I never want to see schools in a position where they're not able to welcome children, but we have had to take this incredibly difficult decision. I want to see all schools opening on the 22nd of February, but we obviously do have to take into account the scientific and health advice. But certainly, from a department's point of view and from a schooling point of view, every one of us is working towards welcoming all children back on the 22nd of February, but we obviously continue to have to listen to the advice of both the scientific and public health community as to how we continue to beat this virus.
Sarah Olney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State has made a timely decision to scrap GCSEs, AS levels and A levels, and I very much hope that we can avoid the heartache that some of my constituents suffered last year when their algorithm-adjusted grades caused them to miss out on university places that they had worked so hard for. This year, since exams are not being sat or needing to be marked, there is no need to delay announcement of grades until August. An earlier announcement will help students and parents to plan their next steps, universities to manage a fair admissions process, and will also leave time for appeals and resits. So will the Secretary of State, in his discussions with Ofqual, consider bringing forward the date at which assessment grades are released?
I think the Honourable Lady raises an important point, and it's something that I've already raised in discussions with Ofqual. We obviously have to make that judgment call in line with the whole system, and we don't want the whole system of awarding to be dictated by the date where youngsters get their grades, but it will be one of those issues that are in active consideration because, as the Honourable Lady says, it gives students more time if there is a need for appeals, and also gives them more time to make the best choices for them and for their future.
Andrew Rossendale.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State should know the incredible dedication and self-sacrifice shown by teachers and staff throughout Romford and Havering since the start of this pandemic. Their determination to reorganise the schools to keep everyone safe and continue to provide the highest standard of education must be commended. But with schools now closing as part of the lockdown, they will have to do everything they can to move classes for the majority of students online to minimise the impact on their education. However, as in-person teaching will still be going ahead for vulnerable children and the children of critical workers, would my right honourable friend please clarify whether only one parent or both need to be critical workers in order for their children to continue to attend school in person?
Well, I'd very much like to join my honourable friend in paying tribute to not just for teachers in Romford, but all those support staff who open up the schools, welcome the children as such an important part of the fabric of that school community. So very much like to join him in that. And in answer directly to his question, it is one parent who is, if they're a critical worker, it's deemed that they would have access to that school place for their child.
Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Many of my university student constituents have contacted me because they're desperately worried about the impact COVID restrictions are having on their learning, on their research, their educational success, their future careers, their finances, and their mental health and well-being. Does the Secretary of State believe it's fair for them to continue to be paying full fees and full rent when they aren't receiving the university experience they expected? And what will he do to support those students, especially those facing financial hardship?
The Honourable Lady will probably be aware that just before Christmas the government announced additional support for students at universities in terms of an extra package to help those youngsters that are most vulnerable, and we'll continue to work with the sector to look at how best we can support students and the sector as a whole.
Jonathan Gullis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I can't hide my disappointment and sadness to see school gates closed to so many students from across Stoke-on-Trent North, Kidsgrove and Tork. Remote learning has many challenges, from unsuitable learning environments to no online connectivity and not having the necessary digital devices. So will my right honourable friend continue discussions with me and the Minister for School Standards in order to get textbooks distributed to pupils from disadvantaged backgrounds so they don't fall victim to the digital divide whilst learning remotely?
Well, I've asked officials to organise a meeting between my honourable friend, the Minister for School Standards, and myself for next week in order to be able to discuss this. We all recognise what an important role textbooks play in terms of helping and supporting learning, and actually some of the brilliant work and investment that has been made in terms of producing exceptionally high quality material in textbooks. And I look forward to meeting him next week to discuss ideas about how we can get this distributed, especially into some of the communities that are most disadvantaged across our country.
Paul Blomfield.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I say that I welcome the Secretary of State's U-turn on GCSEs and A-levels, late though it was, adding to the pressure on schools and teachers. I'm sorry, though, that his approach on BTECs appears to be an afterthought and an abdication of responsibility. But can I ask him about primary assessments? Because does he accept that proceeding with SATs this year would place an unnecessary and pointless burden on schools? And will he take action to cancel this year's tests and to do so in good time?
I always enjoyed working with the honourable member in terms of our work that we did with Motor Neuron Diseases Association over a number of years, and I always learned that he often speaks a lot of good sense, just sadly in the wrong party. Madam Deputy Madam Deputy Speaker, I can absolutely confirm that that we won't be proceeding with SATs this year. We do recognise that this will be an additional burden on schools, and it's very important that we're very much focused on welcoming students back into the classroom at the very earliest opportunity.
Greg Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I very much commend my right honourable friend for the work being done to roll out online learning, but for a significant proportion of my constituents, there's a small practical problem that up to 13% of households either have very slow or no access to broadband at all, and mobile data is also non-existent in many villages. So what practical support can my right honourable friend offer for those pupils living in such households, competing against other members of the household trying to work or learn with no or little broadband?
This is an incredibly challenging problem for many people living in rural communities, and I'd be very happy to meet with my honourable friend to discuss as to what further measures that we could take. I'm beginning to think that some of the additional resource of textbooks and other resources that can be maybe made available to families and communities which have these acute problems, and it isn't something that we're going to be able to work around in terms of a technical solution, that there may be other routes forward. But I will ask my department to organise swiftly a meeting between himself and myself to discuss this issue and any other educational issues in his constituency.
Dr. Lisa Cameron. If we have a problem there, we'll go back to Lisa Cameron and meanwhile go to Claudia Webb.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The pandemic has highlighted the injustice of tuition fees. Students are incurring on average of 57,000 worth of debts to be isolated in university halls and be restricted to online learning. Yet even beyond this, education must be a universal right, not a costly privilege. The last decade of extortionate tuition fees have saddled young people with debt, deterred working class people from gaining a higher education, and reduced our universities to profit-seeking businesses. Will the government take this opportunity to support students by refunding rents, scrapping tuition fees and cancelling student debt for good?
Well, the statistics would actually bear out something rather different to what the Honourable Lady said. We've seen a massive expansion of the university sector, with more young people going to university than ever before. But also, if the Honourable Lady took the time to look at the statistics and the facts, as against maybe just, not basing her question on the statistics or facts, she would actually discover that there's more children from the most disadvantaged families going to university, often for the first time in that family, than ever before. That's something this party should feel incredibly proud of, and I would like to see even more youngsters from the most deprived backgrounds going to some of our best universities in the country.
We'll go back to Dr. Lisa Cameron.
Many thanks, Madam Deputy Speaker. Dr. Adrian James, President of the Royal College of Psychiatry, has now described the COVID-19 pandemic as the greatest threat to mental health since the Second World War. As chair of the Health All-Party Parliamentary Group, I've been receiving concerned emails from parents right across the United Kingdom regarding mental health. So given that children have experienced isolation, trauma, and for many bereavement, will the Secretary of State now take the opportunity to announce ring-fenced funding for a much-needed mental health and wellbeing strategy for children?
Well, I'd like to thank the Honourable Lady for raising such an incredibly important point, and it would be a great opportunity to meet up with herself and other members of the all-party parliamentary group to maybe actually discuss some of these wider issues that we don't just face in schools in England, but of course face schools across the whole of the United Kingdom. And there's been various different initiatives, some UK-wide for the higher education sector that universities have done so much on, but also initiatives in England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. And it'd be really good to have a four nations approach about how we support young people with the real challenges of mental health. And I look forward to having that discussion with her, because I know that she feels passionately about this issue, as so many members of this House do. And it's very much a cross-party issue. And I very much hope that we can find some cross-party solutions on how we can best support our young people.
Bob Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Happy New Year to you. Could I ask my right honourable friend about early learning? The honourable lady for Liverpool Wavertree has already raised the point, but I would rather like my right honourable friend to explain why in Bromley early learning centres, semi-schools really, are still open. And they have a real problem because all of them are privatised and there's a certain loss of income too. So it is a problem. So could I ask my right honourable friend, not that I dispute what he's going to say, could I ask for an explanation of why these places are open when primary schools are not?
Well, at every stage, I'd like to assure my honourable friend that at every stage we'll go above and beyond to keep education settings open. The Prime Minister has, Madam Deputy Speaker, many times outlined the government's commitment and priority of education. So if we're able to keep a sector of the education system open, because we know such enormous benefits are accrued, not just to the children that are in, whether it's a nursery, early years setting, or whether it's in the classroom in a primary school or secondary school, are so incredibly great. But it's also incredibly important for parents as well, and to families who often rely on those nurseries and those early year settings as well as schools in terms of supporting them. So when the advice came through, and just to reiterate it, that the early evidence from SAGE showed that early years provision had a smaller relatively impact, much smaller relative impact on transmission rates in primary schools, which again had a much lower relative transmission impact than secondary schools. We felt that it was the right thing to do, because it isn't, yes, it's about supporting the children, but it's also about supporting the families as well.
Alison McGovern.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We all want children back in school as soon as possible, so why don't we work together to try and make that happen? With that in mind, could the Secretary of State tell me when he last met teachers' unions and what practical steps he agreed with them that the department would take? For example, acquiring more space for schools so that children and teachers can spread out. What steps did he agree to make schools even safer so that we can get children back in school as quickly as possible?
I think the Honourable Lady is absolutely right. I think where there is a shared commitment to see schools open, it's really important to work together. And I regularly meet, lots of organisations, including trade unions, on a very regular basis. I'm afraid nowadays we don't get to meet physically, and of course it is all online, but we have regular meetings, and I only just in the last week have had the opportunity to speak with a number of union leaders.
Gagan Mohindra.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Happy New Year to you and everyone else at the House. For those students due to have sat GCSEs, ASs and A-levels later this year, we've had to make the difficult decision to cancel the exams, which will undoubtedly cause a great deal of anxiety. Can my right honourable friend assure me and the House that his department will make every effort to provide them with the vital clarity they will need in the weeks ahead?
Well, I know that my honourable friend has been sort of a great champion in terms of defending his schools and actually doing everything he can do to ensure that parents in his constituency benefit from being able to have access to their schools. But he raises an important point about the clarity. I hope that what we have set out today brings a lot of clarity for further detailed consultation that Ofqual will be rolling out. The early part of next week will be the next stage in terms of consulting schools as to these next steps. And we recognise that when that is fully completed, it's really important that we're supporting schools, the teaching profession, and of course colleges and lecturers in terms of those next steps in the awarding of grades in summer for A-levels and GCSEs and other vocational and technical qualifications as well.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Despite serious safety concerns, we're told that BTECs were still going ahead yesterday, only to be told late last night that it was simply up to schools and colleges to decide if it was safe or not. The Secretary ignored education unions and organisations when they repeatedly told him it wasn't safe to fully open schools, colleges and nurseries on Monday. And nurseries are still open in full today, despite widespread anger and disbelief from the sector, nor any robust scientific evidence from the Secretary today that nurseries will not act as a vector for transmission of the virus. Safety is the Secretary's responsibility. Up to 1 in 50 now have the virus and the number continues to climb. So will he actually listen now to education unions and organisations, cancel BTEC exams, urgently take the same safety approach on nurseries that he has with schools and provide upgraded risk assessment guidance and vaccine access to all settings currently open to vulnerable and key worker children?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, can I just say what a delight it is to have the Honourable Member for Stretford and Urmston as Shadow Secretary of State, because at least she seems to be enthusiastic about actually having children in schools, colleges and other settings, unlike the previous Shadow Secretary of State. You know, at every stage, and I think the Honourable Lady understands this, is that we have put the safety and the security of children and the workforce at the very heart of what we do. As the Chief Medical Officers, not just of England, but Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, have said that actually the best place for children is in school. But we have had to take unprecedented action as a result of the Chief Medical Officer for England advising the fact that this nation has, we have to move to a COVID alert level 5. And when that decision was taken on Monday to move to COVID alert level 5, it was right that additional actions were taken as reluctantly as, as reluctant as I was to see us being in that position. But at every stage, and I think it is a little unfair of the Honourable Lady to imply that the safety and security of staff and children aren't at the heart of all our actions, because it is at the heart of all our actions. But we do know that children benefit from being in school. We do know that children benefit from having the opportunity to sit in front of their teacher in the classroom. So that's why, on this side of the House, we've always been so enthusiastic for schools to have children in, and I hope eventually she'll become a convert to that idea herself, as her successor has.
Joy Morrissey.
Madam Deputy Speaker, last year the approach to GCSEs and A-levels meant that private candidates such as home-educated children were unable to obtain a grade. Can my right honourable friend confirm that this year they will be able to do so?
I know that my honourable friend will be speaking not just for many of her constituents in the question that she asked, but actually for many thousands of youngsters right across the country who will be really worried about this. I have asked Ofqual to take up this issue, to look at it directly and to make sure that there are measures in place so that those students are going to be in a position where they're able to be in a place where they're able to get a grade. I've asked Ofqual to include it as part of their consultation, which they'll be doing next week, and we've already discussed as to how this can be done and believe that it will be possible to do so.
Alex Norris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Secretary of State clearly prefers testing rather than vaccination as the means to making sure our teachers and learners will be safe when schools can reopen. Now, the Prime Minister wants that to happen in 6 or 7 weeks' time. To have an adequate testing regime in every school by that period will require working round the clock, every minute available between now and then. So will the Secretary of State confirm to me that every school in my constituency has the access to the support they need to make sure that such a regime will be in place in time?
So we've already seen the mass distribution of testing kits and all the equipment that is required in schools and colleges where they're taking years 7 and above. We will be looking at how we can roll out testing beyond secondary schools into primary settings and those earlier years to support staff as well. But actually, I think the honourable gentleman may sort of, I'm as enthusiastic about vaccination as he is, but we're very much forward with our programme in terms of mass testing for children, with all secondary schools receiving the initial deliveries and all schools will be getting that level of support in secondary settings, and we're looking at expanding that in primary settings as well, and that would include all his schools in his constituency as well as all of our constituencies.
Order. I appreciate that the Secretary of State is giving thorough and detailed answers to a great many questions, but we've already taken up more than an hour, considerably more than an hour in the statement. I still have 13 more people to participate, and I would like to give everyone the chance to ask their question, but I must ask them to not make speeches or statements, just ask a question, and if it's a short question, then the Secretary of State will be able to give quite a short answer. Anne-Marie Morris.
Madam Deputy Speaker, Secretary of State, the future of the country is very much in your hands. Children are our future, and I'd like to pay tribute to my local schools who have risen to the challenge and continue to deliver an exemplary education. But closing schools is one thing. What is your plan to open them? What are your criteria? It can't be ending lockdown given the devastating effect on children's mental health. What is your vision and your plan for optimising children's life chances and giving a clear map of the future for children, parents, teachers, universities, employers? What, in your eyes, does good look like?
Order, order. So I did ask the Honourable Lady not to make a speech but to ask a question. She's asked several questions which I'm sure the Secretary of State will answer, but I must insist that while we have virtual proceedings in this chamber, that people who are participating virtually adhere to the same rules that we adhere to in this chamber. Nobody calls the Secretary of State you. You means the Chair. The Secretary of State is the Right Honourable Gentleman. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Now, endeavour to be very brief. My honourable friend is right to pay tribute to all those who work in schools and colleges and nurseries in Newton Abbot, and I'd like to add my thanks to the work that they do. We've been clear that the testing regime is a key element of opening schools back once more. We do rely on the pressure that currently the NHS is feeling to start to be lifted. That is one of the key reasons as to why we had to take the difficult and unpalatable decision to close schools.
Davey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've been contacted by a distraught young lady from my constituency. She works full-time. She's a private candidate studying for her A-levels. With exams now cancelled, students in standard schooling will have predicted grade assessments from their teachers, but self-taught students will have no such thing. Last year, thousands of private A-level candidates went without any grade when their exams were cancelled. Will the Secretary of State work with Exam Board to make provision for self-taught students to do what is necessary to make sure students like my constituents are not overlooked, and to ensure that their money, time and studying really does pay off?
I certainly will do that. We've already had those discussions with Ofqual and will in turn with Exam Boards, and I'd like to refer the Honourable Lady to the comments I made to the Honourable Member for Beaconsfield.
Simon Fell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As someone who was campaigning to keep schools open until a few days ago, I recognise how difficult these decisions have been for my right honourable friend. But if I could press him on 2 points. First, I know my right honourable friend's made his views on vaccination in schools clear, but could I implore him to look again at vaccination for SEN schools, where the line between teaching and caring is very blurred indeed? And secondly, could my right honourable friend review catch-up funding for schools, especially for areas of deprivation, to make sure that it's targeted so that the attainment gap doesn't widen as a result of this lockdown?
Both my honourable friend and myself were both championing the importance of keeping all schools open at every stage, and I very much thank him for his support. I do spy in the distance the Health Secretary, who is obviously progressing slowly to the Chamber, and I can absolutely guarantee that I'll be making those arguments as forcibly as possible about the important need, recognising those children who are in special schools. And that workforce is often a crossover between education and care. But we'll be making those arguments, but also recognising the broad clinical requirements that the Department for Health have to operate under. But I'll certainly echo those comments with the Health Secretary.
Order. I allowed the honourable gentleman for Barrow, in fairness, 2 questions because I couldn't get in quickly enough to stop the second one. From now on, 1 question, no speeches, no statements. Bill Esterson.
Poll suggests as many as 1.78 million children don't have access to a computer. What the Education Secretary has announced today suggests a 10% reduction in those numbers by the end of next week, which still leaves 1.6 million children unable to access a computer. Bridging the digital divide is essential. So when are that 1.6 million going to receive their laptops, and the 900,000 children who don't have data access as well?
Well, I'd just like to refer the honourable gentleman to my statement earlier, which covered most of the points that he raised in his question.
Miriam Cates.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know my right honourable friend did everything he could to keep schools open, and that he shares my concern for the welfare of the hundreds of thousands of young people now isolated at home. Can I ask my right honourable friend to look urgently at the reports of harms being caused to children by social isolation?
Absolutely. It's incredibly, the impact of social isolation has a real impact on young people. Children are the ones who just miss out so much with not just being in school to have the input of their teacher, but also their friends and that socialisation that comes with it. And always happy to meet with my honourable friend to discuss this and what more that we can be doing to support schools, support teachers and support the education community to support our children.
Patrick Grady.
Madam Deputy Speaker, where and when will families be able to find out exactly what free services the mobile operators are providing, and how will he make sure that that's as straightforward as possible to access? And is he making sure that the devolved governments are fully looped in on this, and that they'll get any Barnett consequentials of additional spending on laptop and tablet distribution?
Well, of course, we'll always work closely with the devolved governments, and it's obviously the benefits of a union are demonstrated about the fact that actually we're able to work together and also work at considerable scale in order to deliver benefits to all parents and children. Obviously, any additional spend on anything has Barnet consequentials, which means that, again, Scotland benefits from being in the United Kingdom and the financial support that the whole UK gains from being together.
Jerome Mayhew.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I know from my own children that a live lesson taught online is much more effective than learning resources being placed online. Whilst teachers always need to be able to use their discretion to take account of specific circumstances, can my right honourable friend assure me that the default expectation during this lockdown is for online live teaching?
Well, we've already set out really detailed guidance for all schools about setting the expectation levels for all schools and what they're providing pupils. We do recognise that there will be a blend in terms of a range of different teaching, but we have set the expectations there clearly, and where schools fall below it, there is recourse that parents can take either with the school directly or ultimately through Ofsted.
Mary Kelly-Foy.
Speaker, as students have been advised not to return to university for the foreseeable future, most will be left paying for accommodation that they cannot use. It's clearly unfair that students renting private accommodation will be left thousands of pounds out of pocket, and the government's miserly £20 million contribution to the University Hardship Fund obviously isn't enough. Does the Education Secretary agree that the government has a responsibility to refund students their accommodation costs?
Well, as I've already sort of set out, the government before Christmas recognised the need to give additional support to students and through universities. That's why we put the additional financial arrangements in place to support them.
Lucy Allen.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to put on record my thanks to all the teachers and support workers in Telford. My single question, my right honourable friend, does he agree with me that just handing out laptops is no substitute for the support and guidance a child receives from a dedicated, committed teacher? Will he do everything in his power to enable teachers to return to school, including considering vaccinations?
Well, I would very much like to add my thanks to all the teachers in Telford, especially as one of my daughters is very privileged to be able to get benefit from those teachers in her constituency. I'd very much like to echo her point that actually supporting children in terms of learning isn't just about giving them a device, it's how that device is used, how that child is supported, and the work that we've undertaken over the last few months to support that in terms of Oak National Academy. Resources that are available are an important part of that. And in terms of vaccinations, in terms of testing, we'll always be pushing at the boundaries to maximise this for our education settings right across the country.
Mohammed Yasin.
Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State has placed the decision about whether to maintain nursery schools on governing boards. Will he make public health a priority and guarantee full funding during this crisis to relieve boards like the Bedford Nursery Schools Federation of the feeling of being coerced into remaining open to protect their future viability?
Well, we recognise there's a lot of nursery schools who want to be in a position to be able to open their doors, and if I can refer the Honourable Gentleman to the answers I gave earlier in this session about the reasons as to why we took that decision.
Peter Bone.
Thank the Secretary of State for updating the House and answering the question so fully. Could you tell me, if a university student has travelled back to their halls of residence and now is going to receive remote learning, should they stay at university or should they return home?
We would encourage university students to stay as to where they are in order to be able to conduct their remote learning. Though obviously universities who aren't doing practical subjects shouldn't have returned back to university at this stage.
Vera Hobhouse.
Students in Bath and across the country feel massively let down. They are paying full tuition fees on top of rent for accommodation they are not allowed to live in. We've just heard the answer from the Secretary of State, and I am aware that this question has been asked several times this afternoon already, but we haven't had a proper answer yet. Will the Secretary of State now commit to the rapid implementation of a review of this academic year with the power to make recommendations for financial compensation?
I would refer the Honourable Lady to the answer I gave some moments ago.
Nusrat Ghani.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I share my right honourable friend's concern over schools being closed, especially for children in Wilden who do not have access to technology. Can my right honourable friend double confirm that those children without access to tech are now seen as vulnerable and they can immediately access physical education, attend school, and they won't have to jump through hoops to be able to get into school?
I can absolutely confirm that. That was issued out in our initial guidance on school closures back in March of last year, and we have repeated that self-same guidance sort of all the way through, where schools have been in an unfortunate position because we have had to recognise that, during, the latter stages of last year, there were schools that were closed, and even during that time, children who didn't have access to that type of education were able to access education settings.
Thank you. In order to allow the safe changeover of colleagues in the chamber, I will now suspend the House for 3 minutes. Order.